North Korea's Kim Jong-un presides over a show of strength for the 105th anniversary of his grandfather's birth as tensions with the US reach boiling point. A military parade marked the so-called Day of the Sun, honouring the country's first leader, Kim Il-sung. This as Pyongyang warned Washington to end what it called US military hysteria or face retaliation.
Now, with tensions swiftly escalating on the Korean peninsula, North Korea says it would destroy the United States without mercy in case of an attack by Washington. In a statement, the country's military warned of the toughest counteraction against the U.S. and its naval forces, saying it would not give the aggressors a chance to survive. Also, North Korea's vice foreign minister says Pyongyang is ready for war and will launch a preemptive strike at any sign of U.S. military aggression.
If the U.S. comes up with a dangerous military option, then the first card is in our hands. We'll deal with it with our preemptive strike. This means war.
So you're saying if you feel that North Korea is going to be attacked, you will use nuclear weapons?
Of course.
The threats come as a U.S. aircraft carrier is on its way to the Korean peninsula amid reports that Pyongyang might soon conduct another nuclear weapons test. Meanwhile, both Russia and China have advised all parties against provocative action.
China's foreign minister has warned conflict between the United States and North Korea could break out at any moment.
One has the feeling that a conflict could break out at any moment. I think that all relevant parties should be highly vigilant with regards to this situation.
China says there will be no winners in a possible armed conflict between North Korea and the United States, noting that Beijing is ready to facilitate negotiations between Washington and Pyongyang. Also, Russia says it is watching the developments on the Korean peninsula with great concern. The Kremlin has warned the U.S. that resorting to force will not resolve the problem. The situation on the Korean peninsula took yet another turn for the worse after Trump said in a tweet on Tuesday that Pyongyang was looking for trouble and warned that the U.S. will take action to solve the problem.
On Friday, amid rising concern over North Korea's nuclear weapon program, a government official announced that Japan's National Security Council was discussing how to evacuate its nearly 60,000 citizens from South Korea in the event of a crisis. The announcement comes on the same day that North Korea denounced the U.S. for bringing huge nuclear strategic assets to the Korean peninsula as a U.S. aircraft carrier group headed for the region ahead of a feared sixth nuclear missile test. According to the official, Japan would want to deploy military aircraft and ships to assist commercial ships and planes in the event of an evacuation. According to Kyodo News Agency, Japan began working on plans to respond to a potential crisis on the Korean peninsula in February, following Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's meeting with Donald Trump at a summit in the United States.
The 38th parallel north roughly divides the Korean peninsula into two parts, and both the DPRK and South Korea have deployed a large amount of armed forces to the line. Actually, this is the most heavily militarized zone on Earth. On the map, we see that Seoul is about 40 kilometers from the border, while Pyongyang is more than 3 times that distance. But how do their armed forces compare? Well, in 2015, a UK think tank reported that the DPRK had about 1 million soldiers, almost double that of South Korea. Its 3,500 tanks also outnumbered South Korea by about 1,000. However, most of its tanks are thought to be outdated. In terms of artillery, the reports say that Pyongyang possessed over 21,000 pieces of equipment, more than twice that of its southern neighbor. It also boasted a fleet of more than 70 submarines, triple that of South Korea, but Seoul has more frigates and destroyers as well as combat aircraft. It also has a very useful ally in the United States. South Korea is currently hosting more than 28,000 U.S. troops, and they're working together towards the deployment of the advanced anti-missile system called THAAD in South Korea. Not forgetting either that the U.S. Navy Carl Vinson strike group is slowly moving towards the Korean peninsula.
Now we'll begin with the U.S. Air Force conducting the first in a series of tests on a new gravity nuclear bomb. Tests assess a weapon's non-nuclear functions and its capability to be dropped by F-16 fighter jets. The bomb, codenamed the B-60-112, is planned to replace a current generation of U.S. nukes. The weapon is planned to enter service by the year 2020. Nuclear refurbishment plan was first introduced back in 2013, but was shelved due to its heavy cost. Nuclear test comes after the U.S. field tested the largest non-nuclear bomb ever on Afghanistan on Thursday, drawing mass criticism. The U.S. President Donald Trump has vowed to build up the military capability of his country. He's proposed a $54 billion spending hike for the current year.
Amid warnings that North Korea and Iran have plans to take out parts of the U.S. electric grid through a cyber attack or atmospheric nuclear blast, the Pentagon is taking steps to protect both the nation's communications and power lifeline. The Pentagon is developing a system that can detect a cyber attack and gin up an alternative communications network for military and civilian use if the grid is fried, according to the online newsletter Defense Systems. Former CIA Director James Woolsey has been warning for years that the grid is extremely vulnerable, and former EMP Commission Chief of Staff Peter Vincent Pry has specifically pointed a finger at North Korea. The Pentagon's focus has been on thwarting a cyber attack, but Pry and Woolsey have also warned that North Korea or Iran could attack the grid using an atmospheric nuclear explosion over the East Coast. That would disable the grid and could end up leading to the death of 90% of those in the East. The Pentagon plan has several elements. First, it would include ways to sense an imminent attack that would trigger protections. And if damaged, it would have an alternative way for communications killed in the attack to continue in a backup system. However, it won't be ready until 2020.
What do you do with an old fighter jet you've got lying around? You turn it into a drone, of course. The U.S. Air Force recently turned an F-16 fighter into a UAV capable of flying combat missions on its own. The test, done as a cooperation between the Air Force Research Laboratory and Lockheed Martin, saw the F-16 able to execute a ground strike mission by itself, as well as to be paired with manned aircraft and successfully take on delegated tasks. While the Air Force had already been using F-16 drones as practice targets for the F-35 to destroy in training, this marks the first time it's been fully converted into an autonomous vehicle with air-to-air and ground strike capabilities. The program is part of the Pentagon's third offset strategy, which plans to use existing equipment in new ways to maintain an edge over countries such as Russia and China.
Russia, Syria, and Iran have condemned the United States for last week's missile strike on Shayrat Air Base, warning Washington against launching similar attacks.
The use of chemical weapons as an excuse for taking action against the sovereignty and territorial integrity of an independent state, a UN member, is a highly dangerous act. An international investigation is needed in this case. We need to prevent such actions from happening in the future.
Syria has said multiple times that we don't have chemical weapons. This was confirmed by the OPCW in 2014. What happened in Khan Sheikhoun was a fabricated action. Violation of international law is unacceptable. Such acts of aggression are obviously aimed at undermining the peace process. It is up to Syrians to decide about the future of their country. Such actions are obviously aimed at stepping away from this fundamental conception and finding excuses to return to the changing the regime.
Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, who hosted the trilateral talks, said any further action by the U.S. would entail grave consequences not only for regional but global security.
The moment this 10-ton Moab device, coined the mother of all bombs, hit a mountainside in Nangarhar province, eastern Afghanistan. The Afghan Defense Ministry, still gathering information, confirmed 36 militants were killed, though local officials and residents put the number much higher.
There were ISIL bases over there. They had activities in those areas. The bomb was really huge. When it dropped, everywhere it was shaking. I believe many were killed. This is a positive move that ISIL was eliminated. No civilians were there at all.
ISIL's Amaq news agency says no fighters were killed. The top commander in Afghanistan, General John Nicholson, says it was an operational decision to support a joint US-Afghan offensive.
This was the right weapon against this target. The enemy had created bunkers, tunnels, and extensive minefields, and this weapon was used to reduce those obstacles so that we could continue our offensive into southern Nangarhar.
The militants are known as ISIL-K, which stands for Khorasan. It's the term militants use for the area they want to fully control in that region, composed of former members of the Afghan and Pakistani Taliban. The President's National Security Advisor, H.R. McMaster, is now heading to Afghanistan to assess strategic options, including how large a force to commit in what remains America's longest continuous military conflict.
The U.S. is sending dozens of troops to Somalia to train and equip Somali forces fighting Islamic extremism in the country. Voice of America, which first reported the troop deployment on April 14th, says the mission will last through the end of September. A spokesman for U.S. Africa Command told CNN the mission will, quote, improve the logistical capacity of the Somali National Army, and the focus will be on teaching basic logistics operations. The last time U.S. combat troops were deployed in Somalia was in 1993 during a raid to recapture allies of Somali warlord Mohammed Farah Aidid. 2 U.S. military helicopters were shot down in Mogadishu in the process, killing 18 U.S. troops and 2 UN soldiers. The incident was dramatized in the movie Black Hawk Down. Former U.S. President Bill Clinton withdrew troops from Somalia in 1994.
More than a dozen people were hurt in a stampede tonight at Penn Station after people thought they heard gunshots. Police now confirmed that report was not true, but the panic it caused was very real for everyone involved. Panic-stricken passengers desperate to escape Penn Station Friday evening as hundreds of people ran from what sounded like gunfire.
It sounded like gunshots, and then everybody ran down the stairs. We came out of the bathroom, they told us to come up and leave.
The NYPD says the pandemonium was sparked by the sound of a taser, which Amtrak officers used to subdue a volatile suspect who refused to follow orders.
There's possibly shots fired inside of Penn Station.
We were able to quickly review all of the 911 calls and determine that there were no actual shots fired.
People nearby so terrified they left their luggage, clothes, even shoes behind, running for what they thought were their lives. The FDNY treated 13 people caught up in the stampede, all with minor injuries. The chaos, though, was magnified because of the massive crowds inside after an NJ Transit train lost power inside the Hudson River Tunnel around 3:30 this afternoon.
I was on the train for about 3.5 hours.
Johnny Martinez was one of 1,200 people stranded on board the disabled train without lights, water, or instructions.
As the time went by, the first hour, people started to get hysterical. You had somebody trying to jump off the train. He actually broke the window trying to get out.
There was no rescue protocol. They had no idea what they were doing. They were changing the instructions. They would say things inside like the train blew up.
Amtrak engineers eventually used a rescue train to pull the powerless engine back to Penn Station, but not before wreaking havoc on travel plans for thousands of people and infuriating the passengers on board.
This is something unacceptable. Our infrastructure is crumbling. We have to take those trains every single day, and there's not a basic rescue protocol for people there.
Most people leaving Penn Station tonight say they were just happy to be leaving at all. Thankful this crazy situation wasn't even worse. Another look now at the scene inside Penn Station. The video on your screen shows the moments once people inside realized everything was okay. You can see they're much more calm, but they're still having to walk over luggage and belongings that people left behind in the pandemonium.
A British woman has been stabbed to death by a Palestinian man in Jerusalem. The incident occurred on the light rail transit network near the Old City, which was packed with people celebrating Good Friday and Passover. Police have identified 57-year-old Jamil Tamimi as the assailant. He's said to have stabbed the victim multiple times in the upper part of the body. The woman, who's said to have been in her 20s, died 2 hours after being taken to hospital. Tamimi was restrained by an off-duty police officer who was travelling in the same carriage with his family, and another passenger pulled the emergency brake. He's said to have suffered mental health problems and holds a previous conviction for sexually assaulting his daughter.
But a different group is currently the most likely to end your life in this country. It's a street gang called MS-13. It has 6,000 members. The government estimates that. Here in the U.S., it's active in almost every state. and is growing rapidly. Just yesterday, they were suspected in a horrific quadruple murder on Long Island in New York. Question is, what's fueling their growth, and what can we hope to do about it? Tim Clemente is a retired FBI special agent. He specialized in international counter-narcotics and counterterrorism operations, and he joins us on the set here in Washington. Tim, thanks a lot.
Thanks for having me, Tucker.
So this is a threat that has received weirdly little publicity, and I wouldn't even speculate as the reason why, but a lot of people have died as the result of MS-13 activity. Give us a sense of the scope of this organization.
Well, the organization began in the 1980s in Los Angeles, primarily first as a stoner gang. It wasn't even involved in drug distribution, it was more drug use. And then it became very violent because their founders actually came from the rebellion in El Salvador. So they were part of the peasant guerrilla fighters, and so they were used to warfare. They brought that warfare to Los Angeles, and it's since spread out throughout the United States. Living here in the Washington, D.C. area, we see a terrible problem in Northern Virginia and throughout Maryland and D.C. proper, where it's really become almost the hub of MS activity in the United States. Los Angeles was the origination point, but now we see that this area of the United States, as well as Boston, Massachusetts, areas of New York and New Jersey, are being overrun. Anywhere there are communities from Central America especially settled, that's where these guys move in, disrupt the neighborhood, disrupt all the local immigrants that are trying to become part of the American fabric, and they're destroying that fabric.
Yeah, the normal people suffer first, always.
Turkey is a country sharply divided ahead of a referendum Sunday that could greatly increase the Turkish president's power.
This is no ordinary vote, it's a turning point. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan tells his adoring base, many of them poor, religious conservatives from the country's hinterland. He's campaigning to weaken Turkey's courts and lawmakers, giving himself sweeping new powers. We trust him, Ayla Şık told us, and we'll support him with our yes votes, God willing. But President Erdogan's critics say this referendum could smooth the path for him to become a dictator. There's a new climate of fear here in Turkey, which began 9 months ago, when an attempted military coup came close to ousting President Erdogan from power. In response, a mass purge of anyone Erdogan's government views as an enemy. Around 50,000 have been arrested, including more than 2,000 judges and prosecutors, as well as journalists, university professors, doctors, a concert pianist, and an American pastor who's lived here for more than 20 years. Barbaros Shansal is a fashion designer who just spent 2 months in prison for posting comments online that offended the government.
One iron bed, one blanket, 3 steps to 3 steps, caged air, alone, totally alone.
He was beaten by a pro-government mob in January and is so worried it'll happen again, he rarely leaves his house.
That's a pretty frightening thought in what is supposed to be a democracy.
Democracy, I beg your pardon.
Are you saying Turkish democracy is finished?
Almost.
In Erdogan's new 1,000-room presidential palace, he's surrounded by the trappings of Turkey's imperial past. Some here fear his real ambition is to become a modern-day sultan for life.
New Zealand's civil defense authorities lifted severe weather warnings in the country on Friday after tropical cyclone Cook moved off the country's South Island. However, meteorological services cautioned the effects of the storm would still be felt in some areas. The cyclone, which was the second big storm to hit the country in a week, prompted authorities to evacuate seaside areas and close more than 100 schools on Thursday. The storm caused widespread power outages and landslides, with roads closed and air travel disrupted.
So we're taking you out to California. These images of the Salton Sea really showing the dry spots that California's just gone through. And the reason we're showing it to you is the authors of a newly published NOAA study have determined that this has been the southern Central Valley and south coast of California's worst dry spell in nearly 450 years. So you see zones 5 and 6 are really highlighting some of the worst hit areas. Now, while the short-term recovery rate has certainly sped up dramatically, of course, with California California experiencing such a wet year, the true long-term recovery from the drought may actually take decades. So what we're summarizing is the difference between this and the weekly drought monitor that we often show you is that this study is looking at the California drought in a different kind of way. It's going beyond traditional weather keeping records, way further back in history to the prehistoric age. And the drought that started back in 2012 had put some of the higher elevations in California more than 25 feet behind in liquid precip, according to this study. So again, it's looking at a much wider time frame in terms of a long-term drought analysis, highlighting that the rainfall deficit is far from over across the Golden State.
Having a drink of water might never be the same again. Called oho, these jelly-like spheres are filled with liquid refreshment. Placed in the mouth and popped, it delivers a gulp of beverage, along with some surprise. Developed by London startup Skipping Rocks Lab, the membrane packaging is made from seaweed, so it will easily biodegrade, but you can also just eat it.
It's quite strong if you think on it. It's quite tough. It's our work as well of engineering to make it resistant enough, but like enough so you don't kind of like choke on it. And we're working as well making double layers so you can peel them off if you have it in your pocket, or if you kind of like want it for hygienic reasons, you can just peel them and eat the inside.
The team hopes it will eventually help combat the problem of waste plastic bottles.
Most people will just grab a bottle of water, hold it for 5 minutes, drink it, throw it away. How can that then exist for 700 years? So yeah, this is absolutely a solution to that.
The company smashed their crowdfunding target of £400,000 in just a few days. The money will help fund a new machine that can produce 100,000 ohos a day. They're speaking to a number of commercial partners, but do not have their eye on one particular market.
Obviously people see these small round bubbles and they just think shots. So that's definitely something we're looking at. We have encapsulated alcohol, we want to perfect it, and then hopefully this will be the Jaeger bomb of the future.
This summer, they'll be available at some marathons, with runners grabbing an oho instead of their usual plastic cup. If the reaction of this crowd is anything to go by, oho is sure to make a splash.
Finally tonight, America Strong, the retired Air Force mechanic fixing anyone's car for free, helping repair more than just what's under the hood. Here's ABC's Steve Osunsami.
For 15 years now, David McCoy has been doing brake jobs, transmission repairs, replacing radiators and fan belts for free.
I get hugs and kisses, and it's just I get the best part of the deal, I think.
It's his ministry, helping people who can't, with a lug wrench in one hand and an oil pan full of compassion in the other.
People that oftentimes can't afford to put food on the table, but they need transportation to get to doctor's appointments, get to work, but they can't afford the repairs on their cars.
With the help of two Methodist churches in Powder Springs, Georgia, this retired Air Force mechanic, who now works for Delta Airlines, has turned this old barn into an auto repair shop.
Lady that came in, her daughter brought her in. They were having trouble getting back and forth to the doctor, and she was undergoing chemotherapy.
Last year, he and his team of 40 volunteer mechanics fixed up 180 cars and gave away 24 free vehicles.
To be able to see somebody go out of here with their life in better shape than it was when they came in is part of the blessing that I have received.